There will be a visual component, but it is literally just going to be us like throwing a couple, not even a couple images into chat. That's why we didn't bother making a slideshow because there was really just not a whole lot that we've got going on for us. Yay, you can hear us now. I should game rise up. These aren't even proper slideshows, unfortunately. This is just images that we were just like it'd just be an image on a slide, so we just here's the image. Okay. Okay, it is 5 minutes after, and it looks like everyone that will be listening in will be here. But if anyone comes in late, this is being recorded. So to start off, as we always do, our bibliography and all the links, all the sources that we have collected. Uh, so yay. So this is the litter boxes in school bathrooms, dissecting the right's current moral panic. So that's our panel name. What a fun panel name, isn't it? So some brief introductions. We are the House of Chimeras. We're a plural system made up of entirely non-humans. Been in the community for been active in the community since 2007, have known of the community since 2003. Please, yes, we know we're old. Old in quotation marks. So, to begin, we need to give a bit of a content warning. This panel is going to be extensively covering a series of current events that have underpinnings of homophobia, transphobia, anti-other sentiments, and general bigotry. And also, unfortunately, the topic of pedophilia will be briefly brought up. This panel is being recorded, so if you need to leave the panel at any time for your own mental health, please do not hesitate to do so. Your mental health is important to us. We ourselves had to take a lot of mental breaks while working on and researching this panel, just because of how mentally draining it is. So we completely understand if the subject matter is just too much for you all in one go, or just entirely too much for you. It certainly threatened to take a toll on our mental health too, just doing this thing. So with that underway, let's get started into the panel itself. And also, if we miss any questions, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the panel. So if we miss you, we're not ignoring you intentionally. We're just focusing on our notes too much. So on December 21st, 2021, a woman stood before the podium during a Board of Education meeting in the Midland Public School District in Midland, Michigan. She stated how furious she was about there being children at school that identified as a furry, and that there was now a litter box in one of the unisex bathrooms, end quote, for, quote, kids that identify as cats, end quote. During her statement, she referred to this as something that was quote, going on nationwide, end quote, and was, quote, part of an agenda that was being pushed, end quote. Within a month's time, several conservative politicians made social media posts and news articles about this claim being made. It was quickly followed by news of the school's personal rebuttal of these claims being completely factitious. Over the following months, similar claims against other school districts began popping up and spreading online, and even more conservative politicians giving their own soundbite of outrage to their followers online. So, what happened? Where did these accusations come from? Who is perpetrating these rumors? Why is it happening now? How could this affect both either the furry fandom or the therian community going forward? And what, if anything, can we do with it? What we want to talk about today isn't so much this one incident. This incident is just one of many similar claims that are being made against a rising number of school districts. The aforementioned claim made during this fateful board meeting wasn't even the first of its kind. What we do want to talk about is a lot of things and how they are all coming together to produce a moral panic that could negatively impact not only the LGBT community, but also the furry fandom and the therian/other kin community going forward. But to do that, we need to start with some backgrounds first. And if you are interested, this is the full text transcript of that person who we just mentioned. So what the hell do all these terms mean anyway? We know that more than likely everyone that is in this chat knows what all these words mean, but just for some background to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're going to give some basic definitions. So what is a furry? A furry is a self-identified fan of anthropomorphic animals and media. To put simply, they are people who have an interest in characters that have a mix of human and non-human animal traits. While furries are generally fans of content created by corporations like Zootopia, the fandom is mostly fueled by content made by furries for other furries, especially visual artwork. Beyond this feature, the furry fandom is filled with a wide range of differing and frankly incompatible interests and beliefs, to the point that trying to give a more in-depth definition of furries would grossly misrepresent any given chunk of the fandom. Of interest to this discussion is but a portion of the fandom. While it is widely misrepresented that furries are people that think that they are animals, in truth, only a minority of the furry fandom view themselves this way at any extent. Only around 25 to 40% of furries in the furry fandom feel that they are a non-human species trapped in a human body, personally identify as or see themselves as non-physically non-human, or otherwise feel that they are less than 100% human in some way. Those stats are based on various surveys that the First Science group has put out. The common misconception that furries identify as non-human stems from an aspect of the furry fandom to create an original anthropomorphic non-human animal to act as their personal avatar. These characters are called fursonas, and many furries have at least one of them, but furries do not necessarily identify as non-human or specifically a non-human animal. So what are therians? A therian is an individual who identifies as, experiences themselves as, or intrinsically considers themselves as a non-human animal, either partially or entirely on a non-human level. Therians are not a subset of furries, and not all therians are also furries. Just as much as not all furries are also therians. Blah, words. There's notable overlap, but the therian community has its own social circles and community history. What is an otherkin? An otherkin is an individual who identifies as, experiences themselves as, or intrinsically considers themselves as non-human, partially or entirely in a non-physical way. Yes, the term therian and otherkin is very similar in meaning, beyond therian being more specific towards animals, whatever someone wants to define animals as. The reason for this is that both the therian community and the otherkin community evolved independently of each other decades ago, and by the time either of them were aware of each other, the preferences towards labels and the finer details of their expectations of their experiences within these communities have prevented them from entirely blending together. What is transgender? Transgender refers to a broad spectrum of experiences where a person's gender differs from the gender that they were assigned at birth, and their genders does not match their sex. Gender refers to a wide range of characteristics associated with masculinity, femininity, a combination of both, or a lack of either that a person internally associates with. Much of what is categorized with gender relates to social constructs and expectations, e.g., certain types of clothing being associated with women over men, etc., as well as behaviors and expressions, but can also extend to physical characteristics more associated with one sex category over another, aka, for example, facial hair is more common and acceptable in men, etc. Sex and gender refers to two separate concepts. Broadly speaking, sex concerns physical characteristics of the body, most associated with or found represented in categories of, quote, male and, quote, female. Gender, on the other hand, is based primarily on social interactions based around associations made surrounding the aforementioned categories. An oversimplification stands that sex is biological while gender is social, but nevertheless, they're both constructs that people have created. What is non-binary? Non-binary refers to a broad spectrum of experiences in which a person's gender does not fit within the defined binary of man/masculine or women/feminine. Within the binary umbrella, some people feel that their gender is a combination of man/masculine or woman/feminine, while others may feel that their gender doesn't fit anything of the spectrum between these two extremes. What is xenogenders? What are xenogenders? Xenogender is an umbrella term for a non-binary gender identity that, quote, cannot be related to standard forms of human genders or gender categorization, end quote. Use of xenogenders is often used by non-binary individuals who have difficulty putting into words their feelings and surrounding their gender and gender expression, and thus resort to more abstract, poetic, and/or symbolic ways of conveying how they feel. It is important to note that while the use of abstract, poetic, or even symbolic words to describe gender might sound very unusual, keep in mind that people have associated manhood and womanhood with all sorts of symbols, colors, animals, and even more things for over a very long time. While xenogenders is an association of gender that to things that used with xenogenders, the association with gender to things used is intentional to fill a lexiconal gap. It is important to stress that people who with xenogenders do not identify as or with specific or with the specific object they use to describe their gender. Further use of xenogenders is not connected to the therian or otherkin community by default. Okay, so those were all of some groundwork just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So being therian and otherkin is not the same as being transgender, and they are not a part. And being therian or otherkin does not mean someone is part of the LGBT community by default. There is a strong crossover between therians and otherkin and the LGBT community, but this is just entirely based on the fact that there are a lot of people that are therians and otherkin that are also LGBT in some way. Being therian and otherkin is not the same as being xenogender. There are a number of people that are both, but they are not mutually exclusive. Now that we have that out of the way, we can finally talk about current events. The unfortunate amount of current events. I'm going to take a quick drink of water before we lose our voice. Yeah, crossover is an understatement. Discussing current events. Due to the increasing number of times these claims have been pushed across America, this panel cannot functionally go into detail of every incident where these claims have been made over the past number of months. For one thing, the number of incidents is already legion, thus listing almost all of them will take a while. And for another, there is a strong amount of commonality across all these claims with it, so a detailed breakdown of all of them isn't really necessary. In fact, the already spoken incident that was described earlier does a pretty good job of summarizing the song and dance of these claims that keep on waltzing around social media. A person publicly claims that students in a district of public schools personally identify as non-human animals, and these people are called furries. And the school staff are giving these students that identify this way with differential treatment regarding their identities. That's the general basics of all the claims that are being made, with some details here and there, but that's the gist of it. Throughout these claims, several common accommodations have been repeatedly claimed to be going on. One of the most common assertions is a claim regarding the placement of litter boxes in bathrooms for students who identify as cats. Another common repeated assertion includes these students are able to opt out of speaking in class and being allowed to answer with animal sounds, such as barking and meowing, by faculty. The common response for each of these claims has also developed its own rhythm of its own. The Pacific School District named will publicly comment with dismay of these claims being made and note how utterly ridiculous and false they are. And whether a school district is named or not, it isn't long before a news article appears focusing on the recent claim and debunking it. So both the claims themselves and the people reacting to it there's a rhythm to how it keeps happening. Unfortunately, it keeps happening. Taking a drink real quick. Sometimes it is a random concerned citizen, but increasingly politicians have been adding their voices into the mix, specifically Republican politicians. In late March, Bruce Bestelman, a member of the Nebraska State Senate, spoke up during a session of chambers in the Nebraska legislature repeating this hoax. In Minnesota in April, 3 politicians, Tim Miller, I hate pronouncing people's last names, Drastowski and Eric Lucaro also brought up the, quote, furries in schools, though neglect, and also fell for this hoax. And also, while talking about this furry phenomenon, they also strongly criticized transgender people. And why they brought the two up together, we'll talk about in a minute. At one point, Lucario specifically stated, quote, whether a person believes themselves to be an animal or some other inanimate object or two-spirited, or whether this other junk is that being taught in schools these days, end quote. These 3 elected politicians are far from being alone, unfortunately. In early May, 2 separate Republican Missouri senators, Mike Moon and Denny Hoskins, also echoed this hoax's talking points while in the Missouri State Senate. Of note, during their comments, both senators stated they gained their supposed information on a Twitter account called Libs of TikTok, which has a history of both spreading misinformation and hoaxes, but also has a history of being extremely anti-LGBT. Speaking of which, transgender people were also brought up by these 2 state senators, and it was insinuated that because transgender people can use their pronouns, that people are getting the idea that they can identify as non-human animals. Finally, while she is not an elected politician of note, Kansas Mayor, these in chat for a bit. Candace Taylor, who ran but did not win for the Georgia governor for the Republican primary of 2020, not only referenced the furry conspiracy on Twitter, where at the time she had roughly 24,000 followers, but she also brought them up in her campaign plans as well. Prior to the election, she shared 10 planned executive orders she proclaimed that she would sign upon assuming office. One of her 10 focused on dress codes in public schools, along with requiring students to only wear clothes strictly associated with their sex. It also stated that it would not allow, quote, furry-related items, end quote, to be worn. All things considering, this fabrication has spread beyond just pearl-clutching parents and has moved on into the hands of politicians who not only have followers and listeners, but also have power to influence social law. Ooh, and that didn't get sent. Send the picture. Thank you, Discord. Okay. So, given all of that, no, this is not happening. Let's be crystal clear here. These accusations are completely false. The accounts of people speaking up against these claimed furries in public schools are full of conjecture and weasel words. Every single account, they heard about it from someone else, from somewhere else. For each of these accusations, their, quote, evidence, end quote, to back them up are full of hearsay. Their evidence is that they heard it from someone else. Moreover, for every school district named in any number of these claims, there have been public statements by these school districts denouncing these claims as being completely fabricated. Also, let's get real here. The rights of transgender people to simply use the bathroom that matches their gender is still being fought across the United States. If school districts are having enough trouble accepting that transgender children have the right to exist, what makes anyone think that there is enough forward-thinking people in power to consider that there are people that identify as non-human animals, let alone brainstorm accommodations for them. Also, even if there were enough open-minded school officials willing to create ways to allow non-human identifying students to express themselves, much of the allegations that are being spread include things that make no functional sense regarding what therians and otherkin would realistically want. Take in everything, sorry. We're not used to talking this much. What tangle of evidence these conspiracy theorists have thus far is all proven to be false. What makes these fakes of some of these fakes being created by trolls and right-wing provocateurs, such as the case of the claimed furry protocols that made some rounds online a few months back. Back in April of this year, images began circulating online depicting a photograph of a slide titled Furry Protocols, and it was claimed that these protocols were from the Waukene, Wisconsin school district. The image first appeared as part of a conservative podcast called Dr. Duke's Show, alongside a Wisconsin talk show radio host named Biggie McKenna, making claims that cat-identified students in schools were being allowed certain accommodations. Not only has the Waukene School District denounced these claims, but Snoops.com was able to uncover that the slide was shown during a right-wing political advocacy group event during late March. Similar other claims and evidence have also been debunked. Thus, as it stands, there is no credible evidence that any school are systematically even acknowledging that students identify as non-human animals, let alone trying to make these bizarre accommodations. So, why is this happening? The fact that these accusations center around bathroom use pretty much gives away the origins of these rumors. Letting it to load. Transphobia! Politically active transphobes have been trying to drum up moral panics that negatively impact transgender rights by fear-mongering less politically active conservatives to take note and react negatively. While they have lost much of the battlegrounds regarding the rights of transgender adults, they have found fertile ground in spreading moral panic regarding children. Transgender children's rights to use the bathroom, transkins' ability to play in sports in school, to be openly trans in school, and to be able to have their identities be referenced in conversation where the hammer is striking the hardest as of late. Transphobes playing on the slippery slope argument regarding allowing people to choose their gender will lead people to identify as animals is not new. The logical fallacy has just finally made its way onto the public political stage. This fear-mongering of furries and litter boxes is made in hopes to stir political opinion into reacting in ways that negatively impact LGBT youth. Now, if transphobes are spreading these claims are openly aware of this fabrication is hard to say. Conspiracy theorists surrounding, quote, the gay agenda, end quote, or liberal agenda, end quote, has been festering for some time in the minds of many Republicans. The struggle to trying to dismantle this conspiracy theory is what that is not. The struggle to dismantle this conspiracy theory is actually a root of an overarching conspiracy theory surrounding the idea that there is a pervasive issue with organized pedophilia in society that is being encouraged by nefarious organizations and people of power. Sorry. No, really. Their line of thinking works like this. Children are being indoctrinated into thinking that they can identify as animals as part of a liberal agenda that desires to break down society's idea of reality and morality. 2. This aspect of liberal agenda is a continued offshoot of people pushing that people can identify as a gender other than the one they were labeled with at birth. These people using this agenda are doing so as a means of pushing and warping ideas regarding sex and sexuality onto children for perverted reasons. Next, the reason people are pulling children into discussing sex and gender and sexuality is because these people want to sexualize children and corrupt them into thinking these perversions are normal. Then, sexualizing children is pedophilia. Then, organized pedophilia is part of a nefarious conspiracy to destroy moral society. And this is how conservatives get to the idea that LGBT people are a danger to children. And this is what is going on when they create this moral panic. So, sadly, unfortunately, all this fear-mongering about furries, not only is it just transphobia under a nice little fake bubble, it's also connected to this huge conspiracy theory about organized pedophilia, and that's why liberals are evil. Yeah, it's a lot. Along with the connection between people identifying as animals being a long connection to people who are transgender, due to the long overused logical fallacies, another thing to consider is that the people making these and spreading these claims would still be attacking therians and furries on their own. The brand of conservatives making the most political waves as of late are fiercely anti anything that is not readily found, that would not be readily found on a set of a 1950s American sitcom. Let's be honest. And there is very little about therians, otherkin, and furries of these that these types of conservatives wouldn't turn their nose at, considering their repulsion to anything that is deemed, quote, deviant. It is also likely no mistake that conservatives are using furries by name as their target of their moral panic for another reason. Besides the continued misidentifying the idea that people that identify as animals to people identifying as animals to furries, and furries being a far more visible group than therians and otherkin, consider that the majority of members of the furry fandom are themselves LGBT. And the furry fandom has a long history of being very openly accepting of LGBT people. Sadly, there is a reason why the derogatory term for furries used to be the term furfags, after all. Roughly 80% of furries are gay, lesbian, bi, pan, ace, or otherwise not straight. 80% of the community, based on surveys. Keep in mind that the current estimation of non-heterosexual people in America is roughly 3.5%. Roughly 5 to 18% of furries are transgender, non-binary, or otherwise gender non-conforming, compared to the currently believed American population is roughly only 0.5 or 0.6% of the population. Conservatives would be hating and attacking the furry fandom even without this misinformation that ties people identifying as animals to furries, because furries are incredibly queer, and the moral panic conservatives are trying to spread is directly tied to their continued attempts to attacking LGBT people and their right to exist. So, all that being said, why does all this matters, and what can we do about it? The fight the fight for the rights of LGBT people to exist in the United States is not over. The fight for the right of transgender people to exist is still a major conservative talking point. The kinds of rumors this panel has been discussing is just a drop in the bucket of the ludicrous statements made in the general direction of the LGBT community. However, what is different about these rumors is that therians and furries have ended up hit by this moral panic that people are trying to raise up. These recent claims aren't the first time that therians have been grabbed and used as a bludgeoning tool against transgender people. It likely, sadly, will not be the last. However, unfortunate this recent moral panic is pushing the far-right conservatives could very well be the thing that brings a large awareness of people who identify as non-human, regardless of what label people try to use for such people, into the mainstream society. Given the current political climate, it is hard to say with any certainty what might happen, but there is a likely potential that what could become varying levels of uncomfortable and unpleasant. But now we get to the part about the panel that we've been struggling with the most. Ideas of what we can do about it. Attempting to confront these accusations are wrought with difficulties. For one thing, many of the politicians who publicly spread this misinformation have recanted their words, but these sound bites of their claims have continued to spread amongst conservative sides of social media. The moral panic rumor mill will spread this claim around and spawn more people believing it is true. Rumors are accepted as truth, and evidence of the leftist agenda is invading public schools continues to permeate. Any attempt at sharing facts are easily dismissed. This is far worse than just battling the Hydra, where cutting off one head can only produce so many more. Because not only are more heads being brought up by the wounds, the heads that have been cut off continue to squirm around and wreak havoc. Moreover, many of the books and articles we managed to find regarding about means of disproving people's belief in conspiracy theories all more or less agree that it's incredibly hard to get someone to believe a conspiracy theory is fake, and to realize that they are wrong. Normal reason and logic methods do not work on conspiracy theories, unfortunately. There is no easy way to dismantle conspiracy theories en masse to people who believe them. Most sources we have found breaking down how to de-radicalize someone all tend to recommend slow personal conversations focusing on empathy. This is a difficult proposition, however, as it carries many risks. Firstly, such attempts run the real risk of driving a conspiracy theorist deeper into their rabbit hole. Second, if they react negatively, the people that are trying to rationalize with them could very well be personally attacked in retaliation in some manner. Unless they themselves have questions that you can leverage against them, and unless they themselves are having doubts about their own conspiracy theories, it is almost impossible to deconvert them. The system of how people know things works differently for conspiracy theorists. It isn't just that conspiracy theorists have a different set of expectations of the world and explanations of the world. It is that their explanation calls into question our very system of knowledge gathering. Institutions of authority in relevant fields are either ignored or dismissed, for whatever facts that don't align with their conclusions, and methods of discovering and testing facts are disregarded. Due to this, due to this, as much as it pains to see people openly believe in complete utter nonsense, you have to ask yourself if the encounter is really worth it. Worth it for the mental and emotional stress of having such a conversation, has to be something that you consider. It is not selfish to put your own personal, mental, and physical health and safety first. Take another drink, sorry. Author David Newitt, who wrote the book Red Pill, Blue Pill How to Counteract the Conspiracy Theories That Are Killing Us, notes that it is far easier to uh, uh, inoculate a person from misinformation and truth and the truth of the matter before they start believing in a conspiracy theory than trying to battle with the misinformation once it takes root in someone's mind. However, he notes that the obvious risk of this, of exposing people to a conspiracy theory, uh, if you're trying to debunk it beforehand, can also lead to people going down the pathways of the very conspiracy theory anyway by causing people to think about it. However, this method may be the best path of combating misinformation, unfortunately. Uh, so, with all that said, there is one thing that the transgender community, the therian community, and the furry fandom uh, absolutely should not do. We should not shame and vilify minors for expressing themselves. It doesn't matter what label any minor does or does not use for themselves or their experiences. Time has shown that punching down against people who are as much victims as we are does not stop people perpetrating this hate. It just creates more victims, and much and it makes the bigots' lives much easier if they can sit back and watch the infighting ensue. People who hate us all hate us. Joining them in their hate does not solve any problems. So our opinion is let let children, let teenagers be as weird as they want to. Let them explore their identity. Let them have fun. Don't blame them for whatever conservatives are being bullshit about. No respectability politics. There we go. So with that, we go into the discussion slash Q&A slash call to action side of the panel. We want to hear what your thoughts are about the current events going on. Do you have any questions regarding what we've covered? We have a lot of sources that we kind of glossed over just because of time and wanted to make sure we had at least 20-ish minutes to talk about it. So if you have any questions, because we had to focus on our notes, so we had no idea what's been going on in the panel for the 40 minutes. Is there a way that you can... I don't think we have a way that we can add people to speaker. No? Can you not do that? Darn. Fine, people have to listen to us make face noises for the next 20 minutes. I'm sorry. Oh, excellent. Um, Cypher. So something I talked about was in my country just came out with a trans kid policy in which parents report to the principal which bathroom is for their child, and they also want to run a criminal background check on them. What? That's fucked up. Sadly, we've heard of similar where people with with children that are openly trans, they're expecting them to have background checks and calling DHS on them, and it's a hot mess. So we know that that's something that's going on in Texas, unfortunately. Yes, please at us to make sure that we see any questions. Uh, yeah, there's unfortunately been a rise of alt-right furries and LGBT people. Um, to see if we had uh, how do we protect our community from this? It's a really difficult thing. As of late, the people that have been actually referencing the Theron and other Therans and otherkin by name is a pretty small minority of all these claims. Most of the time, when it's even brought up, it's usually by people trying to debunk these claims, both by the person debunking talking about what furries actually are, and also bringing up that Therans and otherkin are the proper term for such people. So it's really hard to gauge how this is going to impact the Theran and other community going forward. Because right now, we're not being directly impacted by it, but it's concerning of what's going to happen in the future. Especially as like people with like Katniss Taylor, trying to make uh, policies that would enforce dress codes that that could potentially negatively impact transgender people, furries, Therans and otherkin, alter humans in general, who are currently still in school. So that is one thing that is such a concern, and the thing that drove us crazy making this panel was trying to think of things that we can do. Uh, can you talk more about respectability politics in general? What are they, and how do we combat it per se? Respectability politics is a generally refers to people that try to tell their own community how they should or should not act, what labels they should or should not use, what we should and shouldn't talk about, because whatever they're trying to silence people from talking about or saying may be deemed or seen negatively by mainstream or some aspect of mainstream society. So people that dislike people using the word queer, et cetera, et cetera. The fear is it's going to make it harder for people in general to exist. So that's a bit about what respectability politics is. Um, and it's really hard to combat respectability politics because it is a community attacking itself and trying to combat and dissuade people from thinking that that is the proper means of dismantling hateful groups and hateful misconceptions about people is really difficult. We're getting behind on questions. Dove, I have a question. Do you think these conspiracy theories are going to gain enough traction to endanger people for being furries? Above and beyond the fact that it reinforces and attacks real gender people. It's really hard to say. There's so many. It's not as popular as it once was to attack and troll furries, uh, but it could be a real thing that the furry fandom might have to deal with of conservatives en masse picketing furry conventions. I could see that possibly being a thing. As ridiculous it sounds, because we know that in the past people have tried to picket and uh, protest outside of furry conventions, so we know that has happened before. But we could see that happening again. Schools trying to enact policies that would negatively impact uh, students trying to express themselves in any way could be a negative thing. Um, but as far as like in affecting adult furries, it's really hard to say what could happen. Uh, we're behind on questions. We talked too much. Irax ask, oh, that was amazing. Thank you. We feel like we blundered so much about. I said earlier, but you should consider contacting Robert Evans because I think this would be something very useful for him to interview someone on. I believe Behind the Bastards and maybe Worst Year Ever could be possible places that could uh, disseminating uh, such more folks aware and aligned, uh, if that makes sense. My brain is not trying to English this morning. Mood. Robert Evans. We're gonna have to look at Robert Evans, Worst Year Ever, and Behind the Bastards. We're gonna have to look that up because I don't know if we recognize those. Sound familiar, but our brain is trying to function this morning. See if we missed anybody else. Paige. Heads up, there are people. Oh, yay! Oh, there's another pan. Oh no, there's a channel that we've been missing. Ah! So, the furry fandom is much larger and has more social sway than the Therian otherkin communities. In your opinions, do you think that the Therian otherkin communities should be more or less vocal, whereas visible about these issues? It's really hard to say, especially because the community as it exists today doesn't have kind of a doesn't have that many formal organizations that can be the talking heads for the community. There's no First Science. I mean, there is First Science, which is now starting to move into talking about Theron and otherkin, but there is no strict like First Science group that is directly for the Theron and otherkin community, where academics that specialize in talking about studying Therans and otherkin can be like, no, this is not true, and here's all of our stats and everything. There's no outside of First Science, there's no real group that is their focus. So instead of having non-Therans and otherkin being the people who are professionals who can be the talking points for the community, unfortunately, people that can be voices kind of comes down to a very personal, individual. What's the word I'm looking for? It comes down to individuals, and that's a really like no one can force anyone else, and no one should force anyone else to that they must be a voice of the community because depending on your job, depending on your social situation, it may not be safe for you to be out, or it just may be uncomfortable and just not something you want to do. Uh, so, and it's also really difficult for people that want to be vocal finding the right um, finding the right ways of being vocal. There's been so many issues in the past with people agreeing to be interviewed and then they end up being shown in very unflattering ways, either because of editing that takes place after the fact or just commentary that's given around the person talking. So it's very difficult to be vocal in finding ways to not make a fool of yourself. Unfortunately, that's very difficult in media. Trying to get real. Okay, we have only a few more minutes before we run out of time, and we don't want to overlap with another one. So we're going to try to burn through any last questions. Baby dog. If furries is a subculture which appeals to most minorities, why do we suspect alt-right people in becoming attracted to it now? I suspect it has to do with a lot of the alt-right usually feels othered and socially otherwise. But I can't think of a better reason. It's really hard because the alt-right, and that was one thing that we forgot to talk about, was we originally titled this panel alt-right, but after doing some research, it really comes down to this is not, well, our panel ended up not being so much about what the alt-right is doing as much as conservatives, the right in general. The people that are mostly focusing on this are more of a Christian nationalist-esque movement of political views as opposed to alt-right. The alt-right it's really hard to define what the alt-right is, but it in general is what was our notes on how to easily best define what the alt-right is, because it's a mess. The alt-right is a right-wing ideological movement characterized by its rejection of mainstream politics that widely use the internet uh, to disseminate provocative content. While it, while it does have a sexist and widely anti-LGBT perspective, the biggest theme of the alt-right uh, bases around white supremacy and white nationalism. And so, uh, based on that, it's the alt-right is very internet based, and things like the furry fandom, etc., is also a very internet based community. And based on what we've read, the alt-right got a lot of its start in trolling meccas like 4chan, like all the other places that are strongly based around trolling. And there's a strong overlap with people that are in the furry fandom or related to the furry fandom. So it's very hard and easy for people to end up getting sucked into these mindsets. And some people in the alt-right openly say that they're just doing it to troll people. They don't even believe what they're saying, which just makes things all the worse. Oh no, we're running out of 5 minutes. Zanes. Thanks. We don't know if we're doing a good job in this panel. I was wondering, are these allegations conspiracies only aimed at trans furries and therians, or are they also aimed at people with socioidentity disorder and non-human entities alters, non-human people who suffer from mental illness? We haven't really seen anything. Any of the claims that we have found don't really mention plurality or non-human people with mental illnesses. We have not really seen that happen. We have mostly, when people talk about claiming about furries in schools, if they mention any group related to it, they almost every time, any other like grouping that we have heard while these claims are being made directly references trans people, non-binary people, intersex people. We saw one politician talk about two-spirited people. It's pretty strongly all based around the conservatives' negative opinions regarding sex and gender. That's not to say that we won't see people bringing up plurality and mental illness in general, because, well, ableism is rife in conservative circles as well, and the conservative people saying that people that are transgender are just mentally ill is way too high. So I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a thing. But right now, what we have seen thus in the past couple of months haven't really brought it up. But with the state of things, that could very well change. Okay, and we saw you've got 9 minutes left before Roddy's panel. Roddy's panel! Ah, we're so excited. We're so excited for Roddy's panel. So yeah, unfortunately we've rambled a whole lot. We hope so since we have only 2 minutes left, can someone give us which panel Ronnie's going to be in, so we can kind of say that for people here in chat. Ronnie will be in panel 4. So we want to make sure that we say that to everyone, because we're gonna run over there. Yay, people are over there. So we're gonna wrap ours up. We thank everyone for daring to listen to us ramble for an hour, and we hope everyone has a great con. Thank you.